Thank you for joining me, and hope you're all settled down well, and looking forward to the next sort of 45 minutes of a presentation. My name is Peter Coombs, and I'm 15 plus years here at XP Solutions, on the cusp of our merger with Innovyze, which is an exciting time for me personally, having started with WASP in the 1980s, and a very good bit of news to share with you. So anyway, without further ado, let's take a look at what we'll cover during the presentation this lunchtime. For those that are new to the presentations, there is a little pop-up window, and you should be able to sort of pose questions and things. I'm here on my own today, so what we'll have to do is answer those questions post-webinar, but feel free to post them up or email ukeducation@xpsolutions.com, and we'll endeavour to answer them for you and share with the wider audience. So what we're hearing from the marketplace is that we're all extremely busy. It's an unprecedented sort of time of our lives in terms of work going on, but also the fact that we have to do a lot more sort of detailed design of the drainage systems right at the outset of a project. So we thought it'd be interesting to sort of share what we've been learning through the industry and the causes and the reasons behind that extra work that we seem to have to be doing earlier in the process. And it's really being driven through the legislation, the standards that are kind of coming through. Some are already here, some are in process, and the latest guidance that we're all trying to implement on our sustainable drainage schemes and developments across the lands. So what I'll do, I'll take an overview and step back a few years. So I've been here for sort of 15 and a half years. So my constant in my lifetime of work actually has been change. And whether that be standards or guidance or whatever, it's an ever-changing feast. I won't go through in each and every line here in a massive amount of detail, but just to orientate yourselves as to what the causes have been from the highest possible level, which is Europe, so EU, so European Union, so EU Water Framework Directive, which came out in the year 2000. And that covers improved biodiversity, improvements to the environment, cleaning up the water, surface water in general, around the coast and the rivers, lakes, etc., groundwater, all of those aspects. And that's been kind of finding its way through the system to endeavour the use of more sustainable drainage systems to clean up diffuse pollution specifically. We've also experienced an unprecedented amount of flooding across Europe. So the EU Floods Directive came out in the year 2000, and we have taken that EU directive and then implemented through flood risk regulations, flood and water management acts, whether we're in England or Wales or Scotland or Ireland, all of this information has been sort of fed through in local legislation. The consequence of that has been that there's been a bit of a shift in terms of who's responsible for flooding. And typically now we're finding it is the local authorities that are responsible for localized flooding. And the likes of SEPA, the Environment Agency, they're taking like a more strategic role. And they're looking at river basin sort of scale plans. So there's been a distinct sort of shift, if you like, from around about 10 years ago. And that's taken time to come through. We also have climate change, hot topic with Mr. Trump and his actions more recently. But we'll take a look at some of these aspects in a little bit more detail during the course of the presentation today. So feeding down through, you can see that on the time scale, there's an increasing amount of legislation that's been coming through quite quickly, fairly recently, leading into the SuDS manual C753, which most people are kind of trying to implement right now. We have non-statutory SuDS technical standards that have been coming out, and there's a little bit of an update on these things as I go through, as I say. So looking at the EU Water Framework Directive, enforced from December 22nd in 2000, and the idea was to clean up and improve the quality of the water up to a good quality status by the year 2016, by the end of last year. We've kind of failed on that one. We were hit by a global credit crunch midway through. There's still unfinished business, but bottom line. But the research was telling us way back then that the only effective means of ensuring protection of the urban environment and the urban receiving waters and to mitigate against diffuse pollution is by implementing increasing amounts of sustainable drainage systems. And when we say SuDS, we're thinking of the more natural systems, but they could incorporate porous car parking areas, etc. They don't all have to be natural systems, but we know that the natural systems will cleanse the diffuse pollution, that first flush of hydrocarbons, heavy metals, etc., that we can then treat within the treatment train more naturally. And this is sort of taken down through further in the Flood and Water Management Act 2010. So the legislation, looking at ecosystems, we're looking at the EU Water Framework Directive. Now, how is this being implemented across the land? Well, if you're in Wales, it's going through the sort of planning system through TAN 15. In England, the National Planning Policy Framework, and in Scotland, typically through the likes of PAN 61. If we then look at the diffuse pollution, this is how we can implement the SuDS aspect through the planning system. So when you're putting in for an outline planning or right at the very outset of a scheme, this is really where you're now being asked to provide more evidence earlier in the process. When we look at flooding, the EU Floods Directive came out in 2009, and then the same year in Scotland, the Flood Risk Management Bill was enacted. So Scottish Executive, very quick on their feet. It took a little bit longer in England and in Wales to implement through the Flood and Water Management Bill that came out in 2010, clearly defining roles and targets, who's responsible for what, and what we will be enacting over a period of time. There's a lot more to the EU Floods Directive that I'm going to share here now, but the key targets that I see were these three. By the end of 2011, we had to produce preliminary flood risk assessments. And when I say we, I mean across the whole of Europe, and submit to Europe. So this is to say we're aware that we've had flooding. This is the kind of area that we're aware of that it's happened in, but we may not have a lot of detailed information about it. So it's just a preliminary assessment. And then we had 2 years to then produce flood hazard maps and flood risk maps, not across the lands, but really for those key areas that we knew were at highest risk. So in England, for example, DEFRA cited quite a few towns like Hull, Gloucester, Tewkesbury, Thatcham, and identified that we wanted to have a lot more detailed information about that flooding and the risk of flooding by December 2013. And all that information was passed up to Europe as well. Really being sort of fed through DEFRA and the Environment Agency, but very much hand in glove with the local authorities. So bearing in mind that the localized legislation took place in 2009 and 2010, where the responsibilities were put more firmly in the lap of the local authorities, you can see that we only had a year or so for those people to get up to speed and liaise with SEPA and the Environment Agency to feed that information through. Then we had another couple of years to build up some more local knowledge and maybe do some more detailed mapping and modelling. And then by December 2015, we had to have flood risk management plans. What we realised at the outset is that we can't afford to fix every single flooding problem, unfortunately, as much as we would love to. It's simply not feasible. And when you take into consideration climate change, how high do you build the flood walls? So we cannot mitigate against every single aspect. So the question arises, what will we do in the eventual requirement of evacuating people? So let's have a management plan in place and identify the vulnerable and have clear plans. So that was implemented by the end of 2015. Now, it would appear as though then nothing happens. Well, that's not the case, because all of these targets now have to be reviewed on a 6-yearly basis. So by the end of December 2017, by the end of this year, we have to revisit the preliminary flood risk assessments and then feedback to Europe and so on and so forth. What will the aspect of Brexit bring to this? I don't believe this will adversely affect what we're trying to achieve, because we've always been using kind of good practice, best practice from around the world. It doesn't have to be Europe, but we've been using good practice from Australia, from America, etc., Spain, a range of different countries. So I don't see the Brexit thing being an issue in terms of flooding. The photograph on the right-hand side, this was taken in July of 2007. So this is the summer of 2007 in Thatcham, where there were vehicles being washed down the road, where parents were trying to go and pick their children up from school, with the school being closed down this road because of the flooding reaching the top of a curb by midday. So they were called in to close the school in the afternoon, and this is around about like 2:30 in the afternoon. Now, in terms of the flood hazard mapping and the flood risk management plans, there's a lot of good guidance that's come through. Now, here's an example from DEFRA. And what they've produced here, this is in February 2009, is a technical guidance document on how to produce surface water management plans. And with that flooding photograph that I just shared with you in Thatcham, the floods were so severe in July 2007, we had the pit report and then the pit review. And within the pit review, his 18th recommendation of 90 plus recommendations was to produce a more robust surface water management plan guidance document. So here it is. And all of those 90 odd recommendations from PIT were implemented in the Flood and Water Management Act. So to the credit to all parties, they took everything on board, and they've been trying their best to make a bad situation better since these times. There have been other documents coming out, such as the Future Water document, establishing surface water management plans as a way of improving the coordination between the various stakeholders. One of the big things that happened in 2007 when we experienced the flooding, it was just the sheer chaos, and who's responsible, who's taking charge. Is it the emergency services? Was it the Environment Agency? Was it the local authority? So now it's very firmly in the lap of the lead local flood authorities, if you're talking about England and Wales. In December 2008, 6 pilot studies were launched, and we've got the living draft guidance published in February of 2009. So those pilot studies were in Gloucestershire, as I mentioned, Hull, Warrington, Thatcham, Richmond, and Leeds. They were the kind of key ones used as studies. And this is the sort of wheel that we would start off at the midday, the 12 o'clock hour, and then start with our preparation of information. So how do you produce a surface water management plan? Well, we prepare by collating information, having established partnerships. So we would sit around and discuss who are the stakeholders involved. It could be local authorities, emergency services, environment bodies. It could be major infrastructure people such as Highways England or Network Rail, water companies, etc. So create the framework with the key stakeholders involved to try to gain maximum value from what we're trying to study. Collate the information and select an approach on what we're going to try to do to ideally mitigate, if we can afford to do so, these horrendous events. And then we go through an assessment stage where we endeavor to understand the risk better. This is where we get involved with the modeling software like XP Swim, XP Storm, so we can better understand where the risk is coming from. And then we can communicate that risk. I'm saying about the stakeholders, the most important stakeholder in the whole process is the community out there themselves. And what we've found going through these kind of processes is that you have local champions, you have people in the local community who are themselves local champions, and they will get things done on the ground. And they really are keen, obviously, to make the situation better. So they'll do a lot of things with us and for us in the process. That should never be underestimated. And then we move on to the green quarter, which is the various options available. So having communicated the risk, we can look at the various scenarios. If we do X, we can achieve Y. And we're looking at the impacts of new developments and implementation of drainage strategies and developing drainage strategies as a part of this process. And then we implement and then go back to the full circle and start to review and go through that process and refine it. It's quite methodical and it's quite thorough. And sometimes during that process, you can find yourself being a little lost. I find this wheel really useful to understand at what stage you're at. And hopefully you can get a hold of that and benefit from those experiences. In terms of projects going on, I mentioned Thatcham. I mean, this is a relatively small town, 28,000 residents, 28,000 homes, of which 1,000 were damaged with up to 1.2 meters of flood water in 2007. And the consequences is a very expensive flood alleviation scheme. So this is called the Cold Ash Flood Alleviation Scheme. This is one of a series of reservoirs that are being built. They're spending £4 million, basically. So this is from the BBC website from April of 2016. So you can see that there are a range of these large basins uphill from the town itself. So that sheer volume of water that ran through. This was not caused by river flood, not by fluvial flooding. This was pluvial, extreme rainfall runoff. And what had happened is the ground to the north of the town, we're looking at the north of the town here with the basin, this ground became increasingly saturated in the days leading up to Friday the 21st of July 2007. And then on that Friday, it started raining right about 8 o'clock in the morning, and it rained for about 6 hours. And the peak rainfall intensity was around about 30 millimeters for several minutes. So it wasn't as though we're looking at 100 millimeters of rainfall happening all the time. They were like peaks and troughs, but it peaked at around about 30 millimeters. But there was nowhere for that water to go. The ground was completely saturated, and that's why you saw the sort of the sediment within the runoff going down the street. That sort of light brown figure was the soils being washed out and running through the town. So it just had nowhere to go. In terms of climate change, I mean, we know it's a bad situation now, but what about the future? Well, there is no doubt all the politicians have signed up to the fact that we are currently experiencing climate change, man-made climate change. So we're putting processes in place to reduce our carbon footprints generally, and this is the way forward. But we can see here from the chart that there's an unprecedented sort of peak in temperature change. You know, since really the sort of late 1970s, early 1980s, you can see the higher range in temperature changes that are peaking upwards. So as a consequence of that, we have the approving authorities such as the Environment Agency producing documents like this, which came out in March of last year, looking at adapting to climate change. We're trying to change and reverse the situation, but in the meanwhile, we're going to have to adapt. How do we adapt? Well, we take a look at how we develop, we take a look at the existing risk, and we make decisions. And one of the interesting tables within that document is this particular one. So if we're looking at the design life of a particular development, like a housing development, for example, I'd like to think that the houses will be around in, say, 100 years' time. So we're looking at the right-hand column. If you're working on a factory site with a design life of, say, 25 years, we'd be looking at the left-hand column. So what we need to do is we need to use an estimate on an additional percentage rainfall intensity that will be happening in, say, 100-odd years' time. So for the right-hand column, if we're working out a flood defense grant in aid scheme, we would create a model, and we would run with rainfall information, current rainfall information, and we would add in the central estimate of 20%, an additional 20% rainfall intensity based on today's rainfall rates, to put together our scheme for funding. And then we would test it with an upper estimate of 40% to say, look, this is what's going to happen if we fail to meet our carbon reduction targets. We're going to experience 40% increase. So we're funded to 20, and then we test for sort of 40. Now, when you are submitting your applications to the local authority would obviously like to err on the safe side and protect their communities against the higher risk estimate. So if you're now finding that you're submitting your drainage calculations and they're saying, can you show us what's happening for the 100-year return period and 40% for climate change, this is where the figure's coming from. So it's a published figure. And within this presentation, I'm putting in hyperlinks here so that you can sort of click on here and then go and take a read of the documents yourselves. Now, the climate change aspect will also feed completely into the planning process. So the local planning authorities have to produce local plans. These are the key documents that the local planning authority have to produce is a local plan. Where are we going to develop sustainable developments in the future up to the year 2050? We start putting these projections together. And then we run sustainability appraisals. You know, what's the impact of us developing in this manner? Is it a sustainable approach? And we have to produce strategic flood risk assessments. This is what the lead local flood authority flood risk manager will be tasked with doing. And we need to understand the water resources required. So we have to have water resource management plans in place to make sure that we can provide enough potable water for such developments to take place. And look at the whole water cycle. So this is something we need to really be seriously considering right at the outset. And this is why a flow control and an oversized pipe is not a sustainable solution in the future. It's helping to fix a short-term problem and mitigate against flooding for, say, a 30-year return period. But looking longer term, we need to consider the whole water cycle. And we need to look at rainwater harvesting. We need to look at cleaning up the water. We need to look at providing amenity. We need to be looking after the environment better and improving the biodiversity aspects as well. But the impacts of climate change, the implications are vast. It's the biggest threat that we have to the built environment, to development, major infrastructure, all of our services, and biodiversity. So it's affecting everybody, and this is why it's rising up the agenda and being fed through the planning process. Now, looking at sustainable drainage systems in a little bit more detail, in March 2015, DEFRA produced a non-statutory technical standard for sustainable drainage systems. So this was the kind of national standard as we were promised in the Flood and Water Management Act 2010. So the idea was that government would produce a national standard, a national SuDS standard, and then we would sign off Schedule 3, and then a body would become a SuDS approving body. This was the sort of final piece of the jigsaw puzzle to be signed off, really. So Schedule 3 actually was implemented in April 2015, a month after that very lightweight, shall I say, national standard was implemented, which basically said if you can't afford to do it, then don't bother. You have the affordability clause in there. And it was implemented not through creating the lead local flood authority as a SuDS approving body, but the local planning authority, the LPA, as a local planning as a SuDS approving body. So that was a little bit of a shock. And so it's the local planning officer that you now have to satisfy. Well, the local planning officer has got enough on his plate producing local plans and fervently trying to go through all the planning applications that are increasingly being submitted. So the local planning authority refer now to the lead local flood authority, who are themselves statutory consultees. So they'll refer your SuDS design, if you like, to the lead local flood authority, the flood risk manager, who will have a team of engineers, and they will look at the impact of your development upon the existing catchment, but they'll also be very mindful of the existing catchment situation, because they've gone through that preliminary flood risk assessment work in the Floods Directive, etc., the flood hazard mapping, and they will come back and then provide you with approvals or not, and would ask for more evidence. This is where it's being fed from. So the SuDS guidance itself, what do we have? Well, we start off with a national standard, which I think we all pretty well agree is very weak. What happened as a consequence of that? The local authorities said, well, this is so weak, we can't really implement these things very rigorously. So the local authorities, SuDS Officers Organisation, LASU, produced their own guidance document. And that guidance document is in more detail, and I'll share some of that with you very shortly. We may also find that there is some regional guidance. So on the right-hand side here, top right, the South East 7, so southeast of England, we have Kent County Council and Surrey County Council, with 7 local authorities, have produced their own regional South East 7 SuDS master planning document. And what the local authorities could do is they could take these guidance documents, like the LASU guidance or their own regional guidance, or even their own local guidance, like the Leicester City Council guide on the right-hand side here, and they can introduce those into their own planning processes as a strategic planning document or strategic planning guidance document. So it takes about 6 months or so typically to go through their planning committees. But if they do implement any of these documents into their planning process, when you put in a planning application, this will be the standard to which you need to design your drainage systems. And many people do refer to the latest Syria SuDS manual, Syria C753. And with all of this work going on, you will find that there will be more need to identify the overland flood flow routes, to look at the existing risk, to do a more detailed flood risk assessment, is all covered in these documents. And this is why we've been producing the technology to keep a pace with all this, with microdrainage and extra modules like the MD SuDS module, which enables you to deluge LiDAR data and identify where the overland flood flow routes are right now to help with the flood risk assessments and your environmental impact assessments, for example. So looking at the LASU guidance, again, in itself, it's a non-statutory technical standard for SuDS, and it's produced and updated on a website, so it's a live document, and you should sort of click on the link and then make sure that you're working off of the latest version. Produced by a steering group of local authorities, water companies, and the Home Builders Federation, as well as the House Builders Association, were involved as well. So, as I mentioned, it's a little bit more meaty. It's great in terms of outlining the planning process that you're going through, so you can put in a pre-application and have a pre-app discussion before going through either an outline or a full application. And again, I think this is really helping to illustrate why, when you engage, and I would really urge you all to engage at the earliest possible stage with the lead local flood authority as well as the local planning authority. Not all lead local flood authorities are local planning authorities, because, for example, if you look in the southeast, you have Kent and Surrey are the lead local flood authorities, but there are sort of 7 district councils beneath them. So the district councils have the local planning authority role, but then the lead local flood authority will have the statutory consultee role in terms of your SuDS submissions. So I think this is like really useful. Particularly useful, I know this is a very busy looking slide, but from left to right, we're looking at pre-application stage, outline stage, full application stage, reserved matters, and then discharge, in terms of the documentation that they would expect you to submit. So this helps you to understand what you need to do. So for pre-app, you need to have a flood risk assessment and a statement, like a checklist, and then a drainage strategy and a statement and sketch of a layout plan. So that's the kind of information you need to provide at the pre-app. When you get to outline, you also have to have layout drawings. You have to have your outline hydraulic calculations, so preliminary landscape proposals. So identify where your SuDS structures are going to be, a ground investigation report, any kind of third-party agreements, etc. So this is an outline, and this, I think, helps to really illustrate why you feel as though you're having to do more detailed design work earlier on in the process to what you've probably been used to historically. It's probably coming through the Latitude Guidance document. There are a range of sections. There was an initial draft national standard that was 80 pages and 8 chapters long, very detailed, and it was whittled down to effectively 3 pages over time. This is a bit of a halfway house. It takes a lot of the good information and provides more detailed requirements, such as runoff destinations. The chapter that's kind of missing in my mind is the initial chapter, which is identifying the blue-green runoff. You know, where's the water wanting to run right now? That pluvial risk. A lot of people are asking for it, but it's not actually identified clearly in this particular document. But they are asking you to look at the flood risk outside of the development, control peak discharge rates, control the volume of discharge, and be mindful of the flood risk within the development. So we have to go beyond the design and provide evidence. So in terms of runoff destinations, ideally, if you can, infiltrate into the ground with no positive discharge back into a drainage system. If you cannot do that, if we're in clay soils, is there a surface water body, a ditch, an ordinary water course available for us to discharge into? If not, then discharge into a surface water sewer or a highway drainage system. And if you really, really must, as a last resort, then you connect into a combined sewer. Looking at the flood risk outside of the development, you'll be asked to provide more evidence. And again, if you talk to the flood risk manager at the lead local flood authority, they will very well understand their local risk downstream of where you're proposing to build. So it may well be that you're up the hill and you're feeling, well, what's the problem? But they may have a major issue further downstream that they're trying to battle with and help the local residents already. Peak flow control, we're looking at reducing discharge rates back to the greenfield runoff rates, would be the sort of norm. The volume of discharge for the 100-year 6-hour event, so you need to make sure that we're restricting the volume of discharge down to the greenfield runoff volume. That will only ever be possible when we infiltrate into the ground. When you're in clay soils, pretty well inevitably, you're going to have, unless you have a lot of rainwater harvesting, you're inevitably going to have more volume of runoff post-development because we're increasing the footprint of those impervious areas across the sites, as well as the runoff from the clay soil itself. And then the flood risk within the development, we need to ensure that we don't have any flooding. So you may find that SuDS for adoption says no flood for the 1 in 30-year return period. In this document, we're saying that unless an area is designated to hold and convey water as part of the design, the flooding does not occur during a 1 in 100-year event, including any part of a building. So you may find that you're being asked to, particularly in inner city areas, mitigate against flooding for the 1 in 100-year, and you may have to add into that the climate change scenario as well. So the design of the site must ensure that so far as is reasonably practical, flows resulting from rainfall in excess of the 100-year event are managed in exceedance routes that minimize the risks to people and properties. So in other words, go way beyond your design, go for the 100-year, add in climate change, and then provide evidence and prove that you will not flood a property. Prove that that flooding will be contained within your site, and then slowly release back into the network. Apart from climate change, something else that's really interesting is urban creep. Now, I know in Scotland, SuDS for Scotland 2nd edition, when we're designing our pipe networks, our stormwater pipe flow conveyance systems, we're being asked to include for 10% increase of the impervious area to cater for urban creep. What do we mean by urban creep? Is that when you build a new development, within 5 or 10 years, people have put in more hard paved areas, they've extended the property, added a conservatory, paved over the drive, increased the size of the drive, etc., etc. So Within this document, it depends upon the density of the development. So if you're less than 25 dwellings per hectare, then we add 10% of the area for urban creep. In SuDS for Scotland, we have to also add in 10% for climate change when we're designing the stormwater conveyance system as well. So the Latitude Guidance has kind of improved the national standard, but it doesn't go as far as the original draft of the national standard, that 8-chapter document that I mentioned. Now in Wales, it's interesting, at the minute there is a Welsh Government consultation process going on. Started off on the 19th of May, and we have until the 11th of August to feedback. So I took this screen grab yesterday, so there's now 44 days left for ourselves to respond. And I'd really recommend taking a look at this document, because this is the Welsh Government's way of truly implementing SuDS systems on new developments, and really truly implementing Schedule 3 potentially. The consultation document itself is some 20-odd pages long. It runs through the proposals, some approaches, and looking at options, and options for the maintenance and the funding options of adopting and maintaining such systems. Within this document, it's really well broken down, and they go through every single aspect in more detail. So credit to Welsh Government on this in my mind. And the three kind of key options that they're looking at really are, what do we do? Do we make no changes, carry on as we are? Second option, do we truly implement Schedule 3 and truly implement a SuDS approving body who will adopt and will maintain those SuDS systems? Or do you just rely upon the planning process? So they're the three kind of options. And if you feed back, then I'm sure that they'll take the implementation of Schedule 3 and potentially either make Welsh Water, Dŵr Cymru, the SuDS approving body, or the lead local flood authorities. So this is all part of the consultation process. In terms of rainfall, just a quick update on which rainfall to use. Is it Flood Studies Report? Is it Flood Estimation Handbook? I hope you're all aware that there is now FEH 2013 point source rainfall available from the CEH Wallingford website. That now can be taken into the micro drainage program and implemented. So that's the latest 2013 point source, FEH 2013 point source rainfall data that you obtain online. It doesn't cost a ridiculous amount of money. We're talking about sort of £30, £50, something like that. It's not thousands of pounds to get the rainfall data for your site, but we then implement that within the micro drainage program itself. Looking at the latest SuDS manual, I'm looking up at the time, so I've got about a quarter of an hour left. I'll whittle through some of the key points of the SuDS manual, because it's worth emphasizing again this holistic approach. We're not just focused on the water quantity anymore, folks. Please take consideration, due to consideration of the quality of the water. We have to implement the EU Floods Water Framework Directive, the EU Water Framework Directive. So we need to improve the quality of the water, and by creating diffuse pollution, hydrocarbon runoff coming from that first flush from our urbanized landscape, we've got to clean that up before we discharge off-site. And that's going to be a key to success in the long term. And we also need to improve the environment. We need to look at improving biodiversity. And we can see evidence of this around the country nowadays. If you're driving on all the A roads and B roads, etc., it's really heartening to see that there's just like a little 1 meter strip that's now being trimmed, rather than everything being whittled down. So you have longer grasses, you have improved biodiversity, wildflower improvements happening. I drive up and down the motorways for my sins, and you see an increasing amount of biodiversity all over the land. So that's being better managed through DEFRA as well, and the farming communities and landowners. It's really nice to see. But we also need to improve the amenity value, and this is for health reasons as well. We need to get people out in their local their local communities. And we have to have nice areas for people to get into green spaces and get away from the sort of stressful, hard landscaped environments that we've historically been building. So those 4 pillars are equally as important as one another: the amenity, the biodiversity, the quality of the water, not just all about the quantity. But this manual will implement best practice. And I can feel the gasp from the developers in the audience thinking, well, that's a row of houses I've just lost there. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that every single housing development of sort of 5 or 6 houses will have a swale running along it. But on the larger developments, if we plan it out early enough, we need to provide public open space. Now this, 15% of an area would need to be public open space. This is public open space that happens to convey water and hold and attenuate water in times of extreme rainfall. So you're having to provide the public open space. Why not have it dual purpose? And you're getting the drainage system kind of for free for the extreme rainfall. So when we're designing swales, there are certain characteristics that we need to take into consideration. All of these characteristics we can implement, with the MD-SuDS module. So feel free to contact your account managers to get a demo and for us to show you. Really, the extent of the swale can be shown on a CAD drawing. It's very graphically, it's a graphical interface. We can put in the side slopes that are mentioned in the previous slide. And the swales themselves are well suited to managing runoff from car park and road areas. It will really help to clean the water up. The pollutants are attached to the grits get washed off, held in the swale. We reduce the velocity so that the grits will drop into the base of the swale, and ultraviolet light will break it down naturally. So it's a nice self-cleansing process that will take place. Do be careful if you have high groundwater tables. You need to make sure that you've got at least 1 meter below the base of the swale and the top groundwater level should you be looking at infiltrating into the ground. But I would still implement these in clay soils as well. They don't have to be infiltration systems. Put them in rock, put them in clay soils. Very good case study by RG Park up in the Lake District, where we were putting these in sort of rock as well. So they're multifunctional. I mentioned the velocity. The velocity within the swale should be no faster than 0.3 meters per second. It's the opposite to the self-cleansing velocities with our pipes, clay pipes and concrete pipes and what have you. We're doing the opposite. We're slowing down the flow. We're attenuating, putting in lag times, and we're being asked to put in a residence time. What's a residence time? Well, we want the water to sit within the swale and reside there for at least 9 to 18 minutes. So within MD-SuDS, we can do that. We have an advanced function where we can actually model that and hold back and retain the flow within the swale for 9 minutes, 540 seconds. And that helps to reduce the peak runoff rates as well. So it's really useful. Also, the flow of the water is not point inflow at the top of the swale. If you're laying the swale alongside the highway, the runoff's coming from the highway and flowing in laterally. So that flow is increasing laterally from the contributing area. So we can introduce lateral flows into the swales as well and model those. They also provide great amenities. The social studies that have been taking place from the different developments where these kind of systems have been introduced, the residents love them. They don't like them when they flood, when there's any water in the bottom. So there's a little bit of an education process required here. So you can see that there's some check dams have been put in place here. So for the 30-year return period, the water level would sort of reach the top of the check dam. So it'd look as though it's flooding to the eye of the resident, but it's just an attenuation structure getting towards the surface. And then for the 100-year, it would cascade over the top and weir over and then flow down the conveyance system. Great for biodiversity as well, educational purposes. So it provides habitats. Looking at the previous slide, by the way, this naturally vegetated. So you'll find that you're going to get bulrushes and things like that that will naturally vegetate in the invert of the swale. and they themselves help to improve the water quality aspects as well. Pervious pavements, if you don't have any room whatsoever, we can always fit in a pervious pavement. Helps to intercept the runoff, reduces the volume, provides the volume of storage under the ground, and it provides really good treatment processes as well. They don't have to be hard blocks and pavers. They could be these kind of grasscrete parking areas as well. So not to just restrict it all to such paving systems, but they are really great. And when you see high intense rainfall landing and just vanishing through these blocks is quite interesting to see. So they do need maintenance. They need to be sort of vacuumed and the grits replaced every 6 months. So be aware of the maintenance program. But yeah, there's some really good quality manufacturers providing those kind of systems for us. Ponds, they don't have to be the large lagoons and wetland areas that I'm showing in the upper shot here of Elvetham Heath in Hampshire. Here's a nice little example from Bob Bray Associates with a small apartment building, and then there's just a little attenuation pond, wet pond area at the bottom, leading it towards the footpath, etc. So they don't have to be massive, but again, they can just be depressions in the ground. They can be rills, etc., running through hard landscaped areas. And in terms of adoption and maintenance, at the minute, I'm just hearing that everything pretty well is going into private management contractors' hands, and then the residents themselves will be paying as a part of their community fees into that fund. And that'll be sort of held for about 10 years. But then after 10 years, the cost could go through the roof. So who do you get to adopt and maintain your SuDS system? Well, hopefully in Wales, we're going to get a better outcome in the not too distant future. At the minute, it's private management contractors. But have you tried the internal drainage boards? Because they do have a SuDS adoption policy, and they will adopt certain things like swales and ponds and basins. I haven't heard of too many being adopted on account that what they do want is an upfront fee to pay for the maintenance over a long period of time. So it could be relatively expensive. But if you're in an area where there are internal drainage boards, do get in touch with them. They are statutory consultees as well, of course. In terms of what's happening at this minute in time, the sort of latest updates for you, there's a SciWem report that came out following the big SuDS survey called A Place for SuDS, and a really interesting read addressing a lot of those kind of key barriers to adopting SuDS. And this is just a kind of overview of the key items here. It's the land take and site restraints, delays to the planning process, health and safety if you're putting in ponds and open water structures, health and safety, the costs of them, the guidance and the advice and the policies involved, adoption and maintenance, and the standards. All of these have been seen to be key barriers to success, which, as I say, with Welsh Government, they're going through this in a very methodical way. SuDS for Adoption, 8th edition, is being looked at right now. This could well redefine the legal definition of what a sewer is to allow the water companies to potentially adopt SuDS systems. We don't know at this minute in time. It's still a little too early. So yeah, watch this space. We'll keep you posted as things are progressing with SuDS for Adoption 8th edition for you. So in summary, it's all about changes. Now, I started working in the construction industry in 1974, and this has been my constant. My whole working life has been change. Certainly working for a technology company for the last 15 and a half years. Every year the software, well, every day the software is changing, but every year we release the latest version. So those changes are constants. The key things that are happening right now that I'm aware of, the Welsh Government consultation, I would encourage you to participate in that. And the Welsh Government did actually produce a national standard, which was really based upon the earlier 80-page, 8-chapter national standard, and that was published in January of 2016. So a more robust standard, I would say, came out in January 2016 in Wales. So if you're finding that you're having a harder job in Wales to get approvals, that could well be the reason for why. And as I say, SuDS for Adoption 8th edition is in the making right now. But not just changes in terms of legislation and in terms of standards and guidance and technology. They are constants, so we live with them day in, day out. But I'm absolutely delighted to share with you the change that's taking place right now. You won't feel any changes yourselves, but the merger of Innovyze and XP Solutions under the Innovyze brand is taking place. So there'll be more announcements coming out, but very much business as usual. If anything, it'll help accelerate the development, I believe, of both of our packages. Everything will be improving with InfoWorks, with micro drainage. It feels great to be able to say that we're all part of one group right now and one company. Really nothing but positive to say about that. So having started with WASP in 1981, it's really full circle and a joy. So it's only the brand of XP Solutions that will be merged in with Innovyze. You will still get your micro drainage releases. We'll still carry on accelerating the improvements and the development of micro drainage and other softwares, XP Site 3D, XP Swim, XP Storm. All of that is very much business as usual. So looking forward to the next month or so, the upcoming events. Next week, we will be in Manchester. We've run workshops around the country in Leeds, Bristol, Birmingham, London. We were in Dublin and up in Dunblane in Scotland as well. So thanks for all those that came along to the workshop. We've had hundreds of participants. There are way over 100 that have already registered for next week in Manchester. So do go to our website, the XP Solutions. All the email addresses and websites, etc., will still carry on functioning as we are right now until such time that we transfer over to the Innovyze names, and we'll keep you updated with that. And then we have micro drainage training, 2 different sets of courses on the 13th and 14th of July. And there are courses C and D. So it's a couple of weeks' time. Course C is working with the graphical interface with CAD drawings and DrawNet. So if you want to just speed up and make life quicker and easier and more accurate for yourself, then come along on course C. The MD SuDS module that I mentioned, which provides all the latest requirements of the SuDS manual, etc., that is course D. So that's on the 14th of July. So come along on that, and even if you may not have the software right now, but you may want to immerse yourself in the software for a day to see how it will help you with your flood risk assessments, environmental impact assessments, all that earlier work, storage estimates and things like that, all covered in course D. I believe there are places available for both of those courses. A and B tend to book up the quickest. This is the design fundamentals and then storage and simulation kind of aspects in course B. So I'm not sure if there's any places left on the 18th and 19th of July. If you go to the website, if it's full, it'll just mark up as being full, and we'll see you on a future course. The next webinar will be on micro drainage. I'll run through some processes using the micro drainage, latest micro drainage 2017 software, and that will be on Thursday, the 20th of July. Because we have the training on the 19th of July, so I don't want to clash with that. So it'll be Thursday, the 20th of July. We'll post up the page, etc. It's not set up yet, but in the next day or so, that will be posted. And again, you can book through the website. I'd just like to thank you for joining me. I hope that was of interest. Feel free to feedback any questions at all, and look forward to seeing you at a workshop or engaging again at the next webinar. Take care. Have a great day.